Before you begin any repair on your vehicle, check to make sure that you have the correct parts for the cooling system service that you're about to begin. Ask your store counterperson for help. Also, make sure that you have the tools you'll need to do the job. You'll need the items necessary to jack up your car, including a lug wrench or appropriate socket, and a jack and a safety support stand. You'll need 4 concrete or wooden blocks sufficient to keep the car from rolling. You'll also need a drain pan, a pair of pliers, a set of screwdrivers, both regular and Phillips, and you'll need a set of wrenches or a socket set, either metric or English, depending upon your particular car. You should have an antifreeze tester, and finally, a sharp knife. With everything ready, let's begin the repair of the vehicle with it positioned on a hard, flat work surface. After the engine has cooled down, you may begin the repair. Set the parking brake and place the automatic transmission in park or a standard transmission in neutral. Even though you may have determined that repairs are needed, you should do a complete cooling system inspection anyway. Let's review the procedure together just to make sure that you haven't missed anything. With the engine completely cooled down, use the antifreeze tester to check your antifreeze. Many late-model cars will have an auxiliary expansion tank, a plastic tank mounted near the radiator where the quantity can be checked. Don't confuse it with the windshield washer solvent bottle. Then remove the cap and check the coolant condition. Or you may remove the radiator cap. While holding it with a rag, push down and turn counterclockwise 1 notch. Wiggle the cap to release any pressure. Then push down again and continue to turn counterclockwise until it's loose, then lift the cap off the radiator. Now check the antifreeze using your antifreeze tester available at your auto parts store for purchase or rental. The cooling solution should have a minimum protector level for approximately 20 degrees below zero, regardless of where you live. It should be clean and show no signs of rust or corrosion. The coolant should be flushed or replaced on a periodic basis per the original equipment manufacturer's instructions. Inspect the belts that drive the cooling fan and/or the water pump. They should be tight and should not show any signs of fraying or cracking. As a rule of thumb, you should not be able to turn a pulley against belt tension. Check the hoses. These are the major cause of cooling system failures. Begin the inspection by looking at the heater hoses, starting at the firewall. As you trace the hose forward to the engine, look for kinks, bubbles, signs of grease or oil saturation, and any signs of leakage. Squeeze the hose. It should be soft and pliable. It should return to its original shape when released. If it is very soft or spongy, it should be replaced. Check all of the hoses. Some vehicles may have a short bypass hose length located either at the heater core or at the engine block. Other vehicles use a hose between the water pump and the intake manifold or cylinder head. Inspect these short lengths of hose also. Next, inspect the radiator hoses. The top hose should retain its original shape as the cooling system drops in temperature. It should not show signs of collapsing. As you squeeze the hose, it should return to its original shape. Make sure that there are no bulges adjacent to the hose clamp with any signs of cracks or bubbles. Inspection of the bottom radiator hose is probably the most difficult on the vehicle. It may be necessary to jack the car up and support it on a safety stand to actually complete the inspection. After checking the owner's manual, place the jack in the proper location under the frame or suspension system. Then, lower the car onto a safety support stand. With the car properly supported on a support stand, begin by checking the bottom hose at the engine block and move along the hose towards the radiator. Make sure that the hose is not cracked, no bulges or bubbles, and that it is not leaking. The bottom radiator hose normally has a support wire inside, so you may not be able to squeeze the hose during the inspection process. While you are under the car, inspect the bottom side of the water pump. A small hole called a seep hole or a vent hole is drilled into the casting. It is adjacent to the pulley or bearing assembly. If any signs of rust, corrosion, or wetness are present below this seep hole, the water pump bearing and seal assembly have begun to wear out, and the water pump will soon need to be replaced. Also, while you're under the car, inspect along the sides of the engine block for a series of casting holes. These are called freeze holes or Welch plugs. These are capped with plugs during manufacturing to retain the water. If the cooling system has corroded or the engine has excess miles on it, these plugs will eventually corrode or rust out. Look for any signs of rust or corrosion adjacent to the plugs along the sides of the engine block. In many cases, there are as many as 8 on an engine. They will be located on both sides of the engine block. And finally, while you're under the car, locate the blocked drain plug if one is present. Normally, this is located just above the oil pan lip, and it may be nothing more than just a small drain cock or a 1/4-inch plug threaded into the engine. Inspect the heater control valve if your car has one. It's located in the heater hose. The valve is controlled by a cable device. If you have a cable style, move the temperature control lever inside the car back and forth from warm to cold, while an assistant observes the valve control movement. If yours is vacuum controlled, checking its operation will require starting the engine. Then move the heater control from cold to hot and note valve movement. The last inspection that can be performed on a cooling system will check the heater core, the hoses, the water pump, and the radiator for their ability to hold pressure. The system pressure can be determined by reading the PSI rating on the radiator cap. A system pressure tester can be purchased or rented at your auto parts store to perform the test. The technique for using the pressure tester is to install it on the radiator itself. A hand pump applies pressure to the cooling system. The pressure is pumped up to the operating level of the system as noted on the cap. Once pressure is built up, you would monitor the pressure gauge for any drop in pressure over a 3 to 4 minute time frame. You can inspect the system for leaks if the pressure dropped. Don't forget to check underneath and around the seep hole in the water pump and the freeze plugs on the engine block. Inspect the bottom radiator hose and the lower portion of the radiator. Carefully release the pressure on the system and remove the tester. The last test is to pressure check the radiator cap. Using the radiator tester and adapter, check the relief pressure on the cap. Pump up the pressure until the relief pops. It should be close to the rating on the cap. Once the vehicle inspection is completed and you have noted any leaks, belts, or hose problems, your next step will be to service those particular items that need repair or preventative maintenance. Once you have the proper clamps, hoses, antifreeze, radiator cap, etc., you'll be ready to begin the actual repair process. Slowly open the radiator drain plug on the bottom side of the radiator. If the vehicle does not have a drain cock, it will have a simple plug. Be careful not to twist the radiator when you open the drain plugs. Catch all of the coolant in the drain pan and dispose of it properly. When the cooling system is completely drained, install a flush kit if your vehicle doesn't already have one. The kit goes in the heater hose that runs from the top of the engine to the firewall. Cut the hose in a relatively straight section and install the appropriate sized T fitting following the instructions on the kit package. To backflush your cooling system, attach the anti-backflow coupler to the T fitting and connect a garden hose to it. Install the splash deflector tube in the radiator filler neck. Now turn on the water and flush the system with the engine running and the heater control set to hot until the water runs clear. Turn off the water and the engine and completely drain the system. Once the system is clean, you can begin to change the hoses. Start by removing the top radiator hose. Loosen the clamps at both the engine block and the radiator. After loosening them, either remove them or slide them away from the engine and radiator. Then, using a sharp knife, cut the radiator hose completely through to the metal fitting on the engine block and on the radiator. Next, carefully insert a small screwdriver between the hose and the radiator, or the hose and the engine block, to spread the hose. Then carefully slide the hose off of the two fittings. Remove any air filter or air ducting if they're in your way, and then unbolt the thermostat housing. It's normally located on the front top of the engine block or on a cylinder head. Note the length of the two bolts as you remove them. Make sure that you mark them and always reinstall them in their original location if they are different lengths. Once the thermostat housing is loose, carefully remove it from the engine. Remove the old thermostat by lifting it out of the engine. Clean off all the old gasket material from the engine and thermostat housing. Next, install the new thermostat. Note its direction. It can be installed backwards, but if you do that, the engine will overheat. Most thermostats have the proper direction noted on the unit by an arrow. Once the thermostat is in place in the engine, position the new gasket over the thermostat. Now position the thermostat housing and insert the two bolts. Carefully tighten them, each a little at a time until they are both evenly snug. Then torque each of the two bolts to the recommended specification. You can rent a torque wrench if you do not own one. Now you're ready to install the new radiator hoses. Don't forget to put the clamps on the hoses first. Install each end and position the clamp. Then, reinstall any items that were moved to gain access to the thermostat housing. Don't forget to put the clamps on the hoses first. Always tighten each of the clamps. Double check to be sure that you have installed the clamps approximately a ½ inch away from the open end of the hose fitting and that the clamps are straight. Now, repeat the process on the bottom hose. While you are under the car, close the drain plug on the radiator and the engine block. Remove the drain pans from under the car. If you raised your vehicle to gain access to the bottom radiator hose, jack it up and remove the support stand. Carefully lower the vehicle. You are now ready to begin the repair of the heater hoses. Remove the clamps from the heater hoses and repeat the same cutting procedure that you performed on the radiator hoses. Do one hose at a time. Make sure that the diameter of the inside of the replacement hose is the same as the old one. Reinstall the new piece of hose following the same route the original hose took. Repeat the operation on the other hose. Now reinstall any support clamps or cable tie straps that were used on the original hoses. Begin the refilling operation by pouring antifreeze into the radiator. Add enough to equal approximately 50% of the total cooling system capacity. Consult your owner's manual for the capacity of your cooling system if you're not sure. If the system will not accept the required amount of antifreeze as you add it to the system, it means that the system is air-bound. This is easily cured by loosening the hose clamp on the highest heater hose. Loosen the clamp and hose enough to allow air and coolant to pass out of the hose. Once the air pressure has been relieved, leave the hose loose and continue adding coolant until the required quantity is added. Next, top off the system with water until water and coolant flows from the upper heater hose. Then tighten the clamp, top off the radiator, and add water to the coolant recovery tank. Now, start the engine. You should monitor the temperature gauge. The system should be working normally. However, if there is still some air trapped in the system, the engine may appear to overheat. Run the engine with the heater operating in the hot position and monitor the system for warm air. Turn off the engine if the temperature gauge goes into the hot zone. Once the heater blows hot air, shut off the engine and add more water to the radiator until it is full. If your vehicle has a recovery tank, fill the radiator to the top and then install the cap. If your vehicle does not have a coolant recovery tank, fill to the indicated level on the radiator. Normally, not more than ½ an inch below the top of the system. Reinstall the radiator cap and again start the car. Monitor the temperature gauge and heat from the heater core and allow the engine to run for approximately 10 to 15 minutes. Be sure that you have adequate ventilation if you're working inside a garage. After the temperature is in the normal range, shut the engine off and allow the system to completely cool. Cover the radiator cap with a rag and release the radiator cap to the pressure relief point. This will be the first notch on the system. If no pressure is present, remove the cap, top off the radiator with water, check the coolant recovery tank, and fill to the required level. Repressure test the entire system. Note any leaks and retighten the hose clamps. Now, reinstall the radiator cap. That's all there is to it. You have successfully completed the cooling system service. If you have enjoyed this approach to vehicle maintenance, look for other do-it-yourself tapes from Automotive Educational Products.